Ed Sullivan sat in his locked office at CBS, staring at the master tape of Johnny Cash's most controversial performance that was supposed to have been destroyed 3 days ago. It was October 15, 1969, and the tape contained footage that the network had deemed too dangerous to broadcast. Johnny Cash performing live from Folsom Prison, surrounded by murderers and armed robbers, singing songs that challenged the American justice system and humanized men that society preferred to forget. The FBI had already visited CBS twice demanding that all copies be destroyed, claiming the performance posed a threat to national security and prison safety. But Ed had secretly made this backup copy because he believed that Johnny's prison concert represented the most important television that had never been aired. Now federal agents were reportedly on their way to his office, and Ed faced a choice that could end his career or change American television forever. Before you hear this dangerous story, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to witness is how Ed Sullivan risked everything to preserve a performance that the government wanted erased from history. To understand why Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison performance was considered so dangerous by federal authorities, you need to understand the political climate of October 1969 and what Johnny represented to both the establishment and the growing counterculture movement. Johnny wasn't just a country singer who happened to perform in prisons. He was a voice for the forgotten, the imprisoned and the disenfranchised at a time when America was being torn apart by the Vietnam War, civil rights struggles, and growing distrust of government authority and traditional institutions. The Folsom Prison concert had been Johnny's idea, born from his genuine empathy for incarcerated men and his deeply held belief that music could reach people that society had written off as irredeemable criminals beyond the possibility of rehabilitation. Johnny had been performing in prisons for over a decade. But this was different. This was a full television production that would show mainstream America the reality of prison life and challenge viewers to see inmates as human beings rather than the monsters they were portrayed as in popular media. Johnny's interest in prison reform wasn't just professional-eyed. It was deeply personal. He had struggled with addiction and had had his own encounters with law enforcement that had given him insight into the criminal justice system that most mainstream performers never experienced. He understood that many prisoners were there not because they were evil, but because they had made desperate choices in desperate circumstances, often driven by poverty, addiction, or mental illness that society had failed to address. Ed had initially been excited about the project when Johnny's management approached him in early 1969 with the unprecedented proposal. The idea of broadcasting from inside a maximum security prison was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in television history, and represented exactly the kind of groundbreaking socially significant programming that Ed believed television should aspire to create. But Ed hadn't anticipated how controversial the content would become or how much pressure federal agencies would apply to prevent it from reaching the American public. Johnny wants to do something that's never been done before, Ed had told his wife Sylvia when the project was first proposed during a dinner meeting with Johnny and his management team. He wants to take television inside a real prison and show America what these men are really like as human beings. It could be incredibly powerful and important television, but it could also be incredibly dangerous if it goes wrong or if the authorities decide it's threatening to public order. The filming at Folsom Prison on October 10, 1969, had been unlike anything in television history, requiring extensive coordination with federal and state prison authorities, special security measures, and contingency plans for everything from riots to hostage situations. Johnny had performed for over 2,000 inmates in the prison cafeteria, backed by his band and surrounded by armed guards who were clearly nervous about the unprecedented situation they were being asked to manage. The atmosphere throughout the filming had been electric and dangerous, with the constant possibility of violence or riots that could have turned the television production into a national disaster that would have ended careers and potentially cost lives. Prison officials had warned Ed's production team that inmates could become unpredictable when excited, and that the presence of cameras and outside visitors could trigger incidents that would be impossible to control. But instead of violence or chaos, Johnny had created something magical and transformative that surprised everyone involved in the production. His performance had connected with the inmates in ways that revealed their humanity and challenged every stereotype about criminals and rehabilitation. When he sang Folsom Prison Blues, the prisoners had responded with an energy and enthusiasm that was both deeply moving and profoundly unsettling to authorities who preferred to think of inmates as irredeemable monsters. These weren't the evil, irredeemable criminals that popular culture portrayed. They were men who had made terrible mistakes but who still had hopes, dreams, and the capacity for redemption and change. The cameras had captured moments of genuine emotion and vulnerability that revealed the inmates as complex human beings rather than one-dimensional villains. The problems had begun almost immediately after the footage was reviewed by CBS executives and shared with federal authorities for security clearance. What they saw wasn't just entertainment. It was powerful social commentary that challenged fundamental assumptions about crime, punishment, and rehabilitation that formed the basis of American criminal justice policy. "This isn't what we agreed to," the head of CBS programming had told Ed during an emergency meeting 2 days after the filming was completed. "We thought we were getting a concert performance, not a political statement about criminal justice reform. This footage makes these prisoners look sympathetic, almost like victims of an unfair system rather than criminals who deserve punishment. That's not the message we want CBS to be sending to American families." The controversy had escalated rapidly when preliminary footage was shared with federal law enforcement agencies as part of routine security clearance procedures. FBI and Department of Justice officials expressed serious concerns about the potential impact of broadcasting the performance, arguing that it could undermine public confidence in the criminal justice system and encourage anti-government sentiment. Mr. Sullivan, an FBI agent, had explained during his first official visit to CBS headquarters, "This footage poses serious risks to national security and public safety. Showing these criminals in a sympathetic light could inspire copycat crimes and could be used as anti-American propaganda by groups seeking to undermine law and order in our society. We have evidence that radical groups are already planning to exploit this type of content for their own subversive purposes." Ed had been skeptical of these arguments from the very beginning of the government pressure campaign. He had watched the footage multiple times and had seen nothing that encouraged crime or violence against law enforcement. Instead, he had seen Johnny Cash using music to remind people that even those who had committed serious crimes were still human beings capable of change, redemption, and positive contribution to society if given the opportunity. "I don't understand what's so dangerous about showing that prisoners are human beings," Ed had argued during increasingly tense meetings with network executives and federal officials. "Johnny isn't encouraging crime or violence, he's encouraging rehabilitation and hope. If anything, this footage shows why the justice system needs to focus more on helping people change their lives rather than just warehousing them in institutions that do nothing to address the root causes of criminal behavior. I don't understand what's so dangerous about showing that prisoners are human beings," Ed had argued during meetings with network executives. "Johnny isn't encouraging crime, he's encouraging rehabilitation and hope. If anything, this footage shows why the justice system needs to focus more on helping people change their lives rather than just warehousing them." But the pressure from federal agencies had continued to mount. The October 13th meeting with FBI officials had been particularly intense, with agents arguing that the footage could be used by anti-government groups to criticize American justice and could damage the country's reputation internationally. "This isn't just about entertainment," Mr. Sullivan, the lead FBI agent, had explained. "This is about national security. Broadcasting footage that portrays criminals as sympathetic figures could undermine public confidence in our justice system and could be exploited by our enemies to show that America treats its prisoners inhumanely." Ed had found these arguments increasingly ridiculous and politically motivated. The footage didn't show prisoners being treated inhumanely. It showed them responding to music with joy and emotion that revealed their humanity. If anything, it demonstrated that rehabilitation through art and human connection was possible and worthwhile. The crisis had reached its peak on October 14th when CBS executives had officially decided to cancel the broadcast and destroy all copies of the footage. Ed had been given a direct order to hand over all master tapes and to ensure that no copies remained in existence. "This decision is final," the network president had told Ed. "The footage will not be broadcast and all copies will be destroyed. This is a matter of corporate policy and national security, and there will be no appeal or discussion." But Ed had made a decision that night that would define the rest of his career. Instead of destroying the master tape as ordered, he had secretly made a copy and hidden it in his personal safe. He couldn't bear the thought of destroying what he believed was some of the most important and powerful television footage ever recorded. The October 15th morning had brought news that federal agents were conducting a thorough search of CBS facilities to ensure that all copies of the Folsom Prison footage had been destroyed. Ed knew that if his secret copy was discovered, he could face federal charges for obstruction of justice and defying government orders. Sitting in his locked office with the hidden tape, Ed faced the most difficult decision of his television career. He could destroy the tape and avoid legal consequences, knowing that an important piece of American television history would be lost forever. Or he could find a way to preserve the footage, risking his career and potentially his freedom to protect what he believed was vital historical documentation. Ed's decision was influenced by a phone call he received from Johnny Cash that morning. "Ed," Johnny said, his voice filled with emotion, "I know they're making you destroy the footage, but I need you to know that what we captured at Folsom was the most important thing I've ever done." Those men responded to music in ways that proved they're still human beings with souls and hopes. "If that footage disappears, the world will lose something precious." "Johnny, I understand how you feel," Ed replied carefully, knowing that federal agents might be monitoring the call. "But I have to follow the orders I've been given." "I understand," Johnny said, "but I also know you, Ed. You've always believed in doing what's right even when it's difficult. I hope you'll find a way to make sure that what those men experienced doesn't disappear completely." After hanging up with Johnny, Ed made his decision. Instead of destroying the tape, he would find a way to preserve it for history, even if it meant risking everything he had built over decades in television. Ed contacted a trusted friend who worked at the Smithsonian Institution and arranged for the tape to be secretly donated to their archives with strict instructions that it not be made public for at least 25 years. This would preserve the footage for future generations while protecting Ed from immediate legal consequences. The handover was conducted in complete secrecy, with Ed meeting his contact in a parking garage and transferring the tape in a briefcase like characters in a spy novel. It was the most dramatic and dangerous thing Ed had ever done in his television career. When federal agents arrived at Ed's office later that afternoon to conduct their final search, they found nothing suspicious. Ed's official report stated that all copies of the Folsom Prison footage had been destroyed as ordered, and there was no evidence to suggest otherwise. The Johnny Cash Folsom Prison performance remained hidden for 26 years until it was finally released in 1995 as part of a documentary about prison reform and the history of country music. When the footage was finally made public, it was hailed as one of the most important and powerful pieces of television ever recorded. Critics and historians praised Ed Sullivan's decision to preserve the footage, recognizing it as an act of courage that had saved an irreplaceable piece of American cultural history. The performance was credited with helping to change public attitudes toward prisoners and criminal justice reform. Ed Sullivan's secret preservation of the Johnny Cash Folsom Prison footage represents one of the most important acts of civil disobedience in television history, wrote one media historian. He risked his career and his freedom to preserve a piece of American culture that revealed uncomfortable truths about our justice system and our treatment of society's most vulnerable members. Johnny Cash never knew about Ed's secret preservation of the footage until it was publicly revealed years later. When he learned the truth, he credited Ed with saving the most important performance of his career. "Ed Sullivan showed real courage that day," Johnny said in a later interview. "He understood that some things are more important than following orders or protecting careers. That footage showed America that prisoners are human beings who deserve dignity and hope, and Ed made sure that message would survive even when powerful people wanted it silenced." Ed's decision to secretly preserve the Folsom Prison footage became legendary in television history, representing the moment when a broadcaster chose artistic integrity and historical preservation over government pressure and corporate compliance. Ed's decision to secretly preserve the Folsom Prison footage became legendary in television history, representing the moment when a broadcaster chose artistic integrity and historical preservation over government pressure. If this story of courage and historical preservation moved you, hit that subscribe button and tell us, would you be willing to risk everything to preserve something you believed was historically important? Sometimes the most important act is refusing to destroy the truth.